If you're somebody who talks apologetics regularly, chances are you've come across this question. It's the kind of question that people like to use as if it's the ultimate weapon against belief. You get a few sentences into how the existence of God just makes sense, and then your opponent eagerly leans forward and says, okay, sure, but can God create a rock so big that even he couldn't lift it? When you think about it, it seems difficult, right? Christians say that God is all powerful, that he can do anything, but this question challenges that. If we say no, then we admit that God cannot do something. He cannot make a rock that big. If we say yes, then we still admit that God can't do something. He can't lift that rock. And then boom, God is not all powerful. But in truth, this question is not as problematic as some might think. So let's talk this out. Can God create a rock so big that even he couldn't lift it? Questions like this have always kind of been funny to me, because the goal here is to confuse the believer, not really to disprove God. It's like someone asking you questions about physics that you don't really understand, and so you have to respond, huh, I don't know. And so they say, then physics isn't real. Paradoxical questions like this can only confuse, they can't disprove. But even with that being said, let's go ahead and address the question anyway. Of course, it's meant to be a trap, one that causes an issue for believers no matter what. But what people don't realize is that from the very beginning, this question has a false assumption. To seriously ask the question, you have to believe something that actually isn't true. Let's think of it this way. Imagine you've made a big old batch of gingerbread people. You make them, you take them out of the oven, you set them down, and you walk away so that they can cool off. Magically, they all come to life and they start having a conversation about their creator. But one of them isn't buying it and he starts questioning. He calls the rest of them sheeple for some reason. I think it's that extra one in the baker's dozen. Anyway, this one turns around and asks, if there's a creator, could they make their gumdrop button so big that even their own gingerbread flesh couldn't support it? And the rest of the gingerbread people wail in despair, unable to answer the question. But there's one major problem with the question. You, the creator, are not a gingerbread person. You don't have gumdrop buttons or gingerbread flesh. The question is coming with a false assumption. Of course, to the gingerbread people, it makes sense. In their delicious existence, this is all they know. People have gumdrop buttons and gingerbread flesh, and that's just how it works in their world. But for you, the creator, who is outside of their world, the question doesn't apply. It's not problematic. It's inapplicable. No matter how badly that 13th gingerbread person wants this to be problematic, you can't be defined by gingerbread existence. So what does this have to do with our question about God and lifting rocks? Well, in that case, they were trying to define a human by gingerbread standards. In this case, we're trying to define God by human standards. Yeah, God can create. He's even made really big rocks. But the problem is that second part. God the Creator doesn't lift. Lifting something that we do defined by our physical realm, it's a human thing. But God the Creator isn't human. The question just doesn't work. This is further supported that God took on flesh when he came to the earth as Jesus, because there's a fundamental difference between God the Creator and God on earth. In fact, this is why Jesus coming to earth in flesh is such a big deal. He was beyond human existence and chose to humble himself to a human existence for our benefit. Could God the Creator make a rock so big that even Jesus in flesh couldn't lift it? Yeah, and you know what? That's not a problem for believers. So the next time you hear this, let the person know that the question in and of itself is flawed. God the Creator doesn't lift because God the Creator isn't a human. You're not a gingerbread person, and no matter how badly somebody might want to define you that way, they can't. And God the Creator, as much as somebody wants to define him by human standards, isn't human.